In this episode, you'll discover how wide a boat lane is on a buoyed course.
Feel the grip of the oar handle, smooth yet firm in your hands. Taste the salt of your own sweat and the occasional splash of water. It's all part of the journey. Welcome to another episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Each week, our host, Masters rowing coach Rebecca Caro, dives deep into the world of Masters rowing. Whether you're on the water or in the gym, join us to become a faster master. Let's go rowing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Faster Masters Rowing Radio. I'm Rebecca Caro, and today we're talking about the width of a boat lane on a buoyed or buoyed course. So, how wide is the lane? How can you fit a wide boat like an 8 and a narrow boat and a single into the same place? And why is it when the boat lanes might appear wide that you find that you are always rowing close to the buoy line? So let's start with this wonderful picture which came from Gunnar Rees. He took it at the Euro Masters Regatta. Take a look at this. For those of you listening, it's a picture of a rowing 8, and it's taken from the middle of a lane, and the bow is just touching the buoys on one side of the lane, and the stern is just over the buoys on the other side of the lane. So from this, we can conclude that a boat lane is nearly as long as a rowing 8. So the width is really wide, and yet when we're rowing, it doesn't feel like that. So let's talk a bit about your perception of width. Now, sitting in a sweep boat, you've got to realize that obviously you're sitting in the middle of the boat and you've got a socking great long oar going out one side and another going out the other side. So your outboard from your rigger is usually getting on for 2+ meters on either side. So you've got a craft that's at least 5.5 to 6 meters wide. So the tips of your oars still are not very close to the buoy line, but they can lead you to perceive that you actually are close to the buoy line. In a single scull, which is the narrowest boat, if you measure it from tip of the oar to the tip of the oar, you can still get the same perception. And part of the thing that aggravates the perception problem is that you end up feeling that you're closer to one side than the other. And that seriously affects you when you think you're going to crash or come close to a buoy line and you worry about clipping a buoy. That affects your width perception. I don't know why, and perhaps if there's somebody who is knowledgeable about these things, they might be able to tell me a bit about it. So where you position your boat within the lane really matters. If you're in a boat that has tow steering, you have a little bit more control over how your boat is aligned, at least in the beginning, but you also have the challenge of keeping that boat aligned throughout your race. And the tendency to oversteer, whereby you get a little bit too close to one side of the lane, correct, and then steer a bit too close to the other side of the lane. That oversteering is real. It happens quite a lot. It happens when people are not aware of where the middle of the lane is. And it happens because when they steer, they forget that when you steer in one direction, you then have to correct the steering to make the boat then go straight. So as a simple example, if you're steering at 45 degrees from one buoy line, this is very extreme. You wouldn't normally be steering at that sort of an angle, but it makes for a simple explanation. If you're steering at 45 degrees, you will take a couple of strokes until the middle of the hull of the boat. So in an 8, that's going to be between the 5 and the 4 seat. In a 4, obviously, it's between the 2 and the 3 seat. When the middle of the hull is in the middle of the lane, you then need to correct the foot steering so that the hull stays in the middle of the lane. What actually happens in practice is you start to correct before the middle of the hull gets to the middle of the lane, so that you take a slightly gentle curve and end up back in the middle of the lane. Now, that relies on you being able to use your perception of the lines of buoys and use what is called the vanishing point. So if you stand between two parallel lines, and you can do this with overhead power cables, you can do it with railway tracks, you can do it in the middle of a road where it has maybe white lines or yellow lines painted on the side of the road. If you look down a straight road and look straight into the far distance, there is an appearance of the parallel lines on either side of you converging to a single point. And in perspective, if you study this for architecture or engineering, or if you're an artist, it's called the vanishing point. Now, the vanishing point is a really useful thing for us to be aware of on a buoyed course, because there's such a long distance. You know, we're racing usually a minimum of 1 kilometer. You have always got a vanishing point. The only time you do not have a vanishing point is right at the very start, where the buoy lines stop where the start pontoon is. And that's why in the best rowing courses, they also have a yellow and black board behind each lane with an aligner, so that you can see exactly where you are aligned against the yellow and black painted vertical lines on the board. Once you're halfway down the course, you've got a very clear vanishing point. Now, the human eye is very, very sensitive and really helpful in this regard, because it's very good at perceiving width. And if you have a vanishing point that you can look straight down the lane to the horizon at, you can tell quite easily if you're positioned a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right of the lane. So you know whether you're in the middle or not. However, the moment for confusion comes with your width perception and the actual physical line of buoys. So usually there's a buoy about every 10 meters down a rowing course. It may be more, it may be a little bit less. But if you feel that the hull of your boat, so the side of your boat, which for the sake of argument, let's assume that's a straight line around the cockpit where you're sitting. If you feel that the side of the boat is parallel to, let's say, the right-hand buoy line, the chances are you are actually steering towards that buoy line, and you will cross over it if you stay on that course. So you need the vanishing point behind you and the relation of the left and the right buoy line in order to get a central position of your boat in the middle of the lane. Now, the vanishing point is your friend, but it's also a challenge to learn how to use it, because we do tend to turn our heads to one side or the other, particularly when racing. You might be looking to see where the other crews are, for example. And that has a tendency for us to then pay too much attention to the buoy line in terms of aligning the hull of our boat. So, firstly, let's go back and look at that photograph again. Your boat is easily narrow enough to fit into the buoy line on a racing course. What you have to do is to adjust your width perception to take account of the tips of your blades, and also to acknowledge the vanishing point so that you can position your hull centrally in the lane, and you can start to learn how to ignore the feeling that you are not parallel with either line of buoys. I hope that that makes it easier for you to start practicing and to know with confidence that your boat lane is your friend, and your vanishing point is the skill that you're going to develop that will help you to stay in the middle of your lane. Till next time.
We are part of the RowingChat podcast network. Please tell your fellow rowers about the show. If you've learned just one helpful thing from today's episode, please consider supporting the show for as little as $1 per month by visiting fastermastersrowing.com/podcast.